Johnny Chickenleg loved the sun, but what he loved even more were the people who came to his stand. Every day a familiar group of old friends would gather at his barbecue stand, their laughter rising above the sizzle of the grill. Johnny knew their faces and their stories. He'd greet them by name, already knowing who wanted extra sauce or a little more char on their chicken. The old friends would swap stories as they waited, teasing Johnny about his secret spice blend and daring him to reveal it. He'd laugh, shaking his head and hand over plates piled high with chicken, the friends grinning in anticipation. Sometimes their kids would tag along, running up to the counter and calling out, "Can I have a Johnny Chickenleg, please?" The old friends would settle at a nearby table, sharing food and memories while Johnny watched with a quiet pride. For Johnny, these moments, serving old friends, hearing their laughter, were what made his nickname feel special. The smoky scent on his clothes and the warmth in his chest were reminders of the connections he'd built, one meal at a time. Johnny Chickenleg wasn't just a name, it was the bond he shared with the people who kept coming back, plate after plate, year after year. The lunch rush was winding down when a group of men sauntered up to Johnny's stand, their laughter a little too loud, echoing across the park. "Johnny, is that really you?" one of them called out, a smirk tugging at his lips. Johnny's eyes lit up. "Mark? David? Steve? I can't believe it," he said, wiping his hands on his apron and leaning over the counter, while the men exchanged glances behind his back. The men crowded around, slapping Johnny on the back with a little too much force and shaking his hand with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Man, it's been forever," Steve laughed, his tone just a shade mocking. "You still making the best chicken in town?" "Only way I know how," Johnny replied, grinning. "You boys hungry?" "Starving," Mark said, rolling his eyes at David. "Give us the works, Johnny, extra sauce, just like old times." Johnny piled their plates high, sliding them across the counter. "On the house for you guys," he said, eager to please. "You're spoiling us," David said, his voice dry as he took a deep breath of the smoky aroma. "This smells something." "Wait till you taste it," Johnny replied, a proud glint in his eye, missing the sideways glance Mark shot at Steve. The men dug in right there at the counter, licking their fingers and exaggerating their groans of delight. "You've outdone yourself, Johnny," Steve said, mouth full, but his eyes didn't quite match his words. "So, what's your secret?" Mark asked, nudging Johnny with a crooked grin. "You always had a trick up your sleeve, right?" Johnny winked. "If I told you, I'd have to make you work the grill." Laughter erupted, a bit too sharp. "No way. I remember the last time Steve tried to cook," David teased, shaking his head. "Nearly burned down your mom's kitchen." "Hey, that was one time," Steve protested, grinning, but his tone was more defensive than playful. The group settled at a picnic table nearby, plates piled high. Johnny joined them, still in his apron, as the men made a show of clearing space for him. "So, what's new with you guys?" Johnny asked, passing around napkins, his voice hopeful. Same old," Mark replied, glancing at the others. "Kids, work, you know how it is. But nothing like this barbecue back home," he added, the compliment landing flat. "You ever miss it?" David asked, not quite meeting Johnny's eyes. Johnny shrugged, smiling. "Sometimes, but days like this, feels like I never left." The conversation rolled on, full of jokes, stories, and laughter that never quite reached their eyes. For a while the years melted away, but a subtle distance lingered, as if they were all playing parts in a familiar scene. Johnny looked around at his old friends, feeling a warmth tinged with something bittersweet. For now, surrounded by laughter and the smell of barbecue, everything felt almost just right. As the afternoon wore on, the laughter grew louder. Mark, wiping sauce from his chin, looked at Johnny with a sly grin. "You know," he said, his voice carrying across the table, "it's crazy that you're famous for chicken legs. Just crazy." Johnny beamed, thinking it was a compliment. He thought Mark was marveling at the strange turns life takes, at how a simple thing could become his destiny. He leaned forward, ready to hear more praise, ready to soak in the admiration of his oldest friends. He felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest, the feeling of being seen and appreciated for the life he had so carefully built for himself. But then, David started to chuckle. It was a low, mean sound, not like the happy laughter from before. "He doesn't know, does he?" David asked, looking at the others. Steve shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "Nah, no way he knows." Johnny's smile faltered. A cold knot of confusion began to form in his stomach. "No what? What was the joke?" He looked from face to face, searching for an explanation, but all he saw were shared glances and cruel amusement. The air grew thick with a tension he didn't understand. The sun felt suddenly less warm, and the familiar sounds of the park seemed to fade into a distant hum. "We gave you that name, Johnny," Mark finally said, his voice dripping with condescending nostalgia. "Remember that day behind the old school when that stray dog was chasing you?" The memory hit Johnny like a physical blow. A hot, searing shame washed over him. He remembered running. He remembered falling. He remembered the dog, and he remembered the pain. The other boys had just stood there, laughing. They didn't call him Chicken Leg because of his cooking. They called him that because his leg was torn up that day, because he was scared, because he was weak. They called him that to mock his pain. The truth landed in the quiet space between them. It was an ugly, heavy thing. His entire world tilted on its axis. Every cheer from the crowd, every child's excited request, every ounce of pride he had ever felt in his nickname was now tainted. It was all built on a lie. A cruel childhood taunt that had followed him for decades without him ever knowing. It wasn't a badge of honor. It was a brand of humiliation, a joke he was never in on. He looked at the men before him, their faces now twisted and ugly in his eyes. They weren't his friends. They were ghosts from his past, haunting him with a truth he never asked for. Johnny didn't say a word. He just stood up. The blood roared in his ears. The feeling of betrayal was a bitter acid in his throat. He looked at their faces, still smiling, still enjoying their little secret. They didn't even seem to realize what they had done. Or maybe they did and they just didn't care. That was worse. The thought that his lifelong pride was just a long-running joke for them was unbearable. But this time, Johnny didn't just walk away. The joyful noise of the park faded, replaced by a chilling silence as Johnny's mind snapped. The world he had built was crumbling, and something dark took its place. He walked back to his grill, hands shaking, but not from sadness. This was rage. He gripped the cool metal, feeling the cold steel steady his resolve. The anger inside him was no longer cold. It was white-hot, blinding, unstoppable. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, his fist trembling with fury. He turned to face them, the smirks on their faces fueling his rage. In a blur of violence, Johnny lashed out. The laughter stopped, replaced by screams. The fire that once brought him comfort now became his weapon. He dragged their bodies toward the restaurant, the embers glowing in his eyes. His name, his pride, was now a curse, one he would make them remember forever. He tore off his apron, tossing it onto the pile of broken trust and broken bodies. The park was empty now, the silence absolute. No one would walk away from this. No apologies, no goodbyes, just the finality of his vengeance. Johnny stood alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. The trust he had placed in friendship was shattered, and he had shattered them in return. Friendship was fragile, easily broken by cruelty, and now by his own hands. He understood now that some people never change, and neither would he. The bullies from the schoolyard had met their end at the hands of the one they mocked. The foundation of his past was gone, washed away in a tide of fire and blood. Johnny set the restaurant ablaze, flames licking the walls, smoke billowing into the night. The best chicken in town would be served no more. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a grim satisfaction. The hearty laugh was silence forever. When people whispered about Johnny Chicken Leg, it was with fear, not affection. The name was no longer a source of pride, but a legend of vengeance and fire. He learned a hard lesson that day. Trust, once broken, can destroy everything. And some friendships, he now knew, were better ended in flames. Johnny walked away from the burning restaurant, leaving the past behind in smoke and ash. Some memories, he realized, are meant to burn, like old wood turning to ash on a cold grill.